consideration of Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor's speech.
Are there any members wishing to speak? I believe I see the honourable member from Peace River standing.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I rise today to give my speech in response to the speech from the throne, and I begin with a word of thank you. A great statesman once said that gratitude is not only the greatest of all virtues, but also the parent of all others. Indeed, gratitude is the greatest of all virtues because it is the plainest. Anything a man has, be it food or clothing, knowledge or wealth, he must receive from another. I have received much, and therefore I have much to be grateful for. And I will begin with 4 thank yous. First, to the voters of Peace River constituency. Second, to my country, our Queen, her Lieutenant Governor, and this chamber. Third, to my family. And fourth, to my God. To the constituents of Peace River, thank you. Thank you for electing me to represent you here in Alberta's legislature. Alberta is, of course, God's own province. But I must inform this House that God does play favourites, and Peace River is God's own constituency in God's own province. The most beautiful corner of the province, and, might I add, the largest corner at that. The history of my riding begins with the First Nation peoples, the Dena'ina, the Tall Cree, the Beaver, among other nations. Our first inhabitants and the first entrepreneurs living on the bountiful land and traveling up and down the mighty Peace River. Among the first Europeans in my constituency was Alexander Mackenzie in 1789 through to 1793 on his first voyages across North America, a decade before Lewis Clark, I might remind our American brothers. And after his first trip through the constituency of my honourable member, Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo, he was so disappointed with his experience that he named the now Mackenzie River Disappointment River. Mr. Speaker, I feel compelled to inform the House that Mackenzie, being a man of refined taste and high intelligence, made no such comment after passing through my constituency only a few short years later. Mr. Speaker, as you know, after crossing the continent, Sir Alexander Mackenzie entered into a career of politics like many of us, and in June 1804, he was elected to the House of Assembly of Lower Canada. During his tenure in the House, to the certain disappointment of his government whip, he attended only one session out of 4 years. And he explained later he was heartily tired of legislation. Mr. Speaker, it was a different age. I also wish to report to this House that in the far reaches of my constituency, even today, farmers are still breaking new farmland, not unlike our Dominion and its creation some many years ago. Canada's first nationalist, D'Arcy McGee, who might be familiar to some members of this House, as was quoted by our Premier at the swearing-in of many of us as MLAs. He said, in the early days of Canada, quote, "Here, every man is the first settler of the land, or removed from the settler 1 or 2 generations at the furthest. Here, we have no architectural monuments calling up old associations. Here, we have none of these old popular legends and stories which, in other countries, have exercised a powerful share in the government. Here, every man is the son of his own works," unquote. Likely he spoke of the Laurentian Hills, or perhaps of the plains next to Lake Ontario, but it could easily be said again today of the frontier that is North Peace Country in my constituency. The pioneering spirit of the people and the get-her-done attitude, as we're all familiar with, would have made Mackenzie, David Thompson, and the rest feel quite at home in today's North Peace Country. Mr. Speaker, I know this House and all of my predecessors would agree that the North in Alberta truly is the new West. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would be remiss if I did not also note, for the benefit of my honourable colleagues, the sheer enormity of my constituency. At over 109,222 square kilometres, that's 16.5% of the landmass of Alberta. It is 1.5 times the size of Newfoundland, the same size or larger than the island of 1.5 times the size of New Brunswick, the same size of the island of Newfoundland, and more than 3 times the size of Belgium. And it is over 227,272 times larger than the smallest state of Vatican City. My home is closer as the crow flies to Yellowknife, the capital of Northwest Territories, than this Capitol building in this tropical city right now. And of course, I try not to draw any parallels between my geography in the province and the geography of my current seat in relation to the front bench. So once again, Mr. Speaker, to my constituents, I thank you, and for your confidence and your commitment to both myself and to the conservative values I ran to represent. I thank you. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my country, Canada, Her Majesty the Queen, her representative, the Lieutenant Governor, to whose speech I'm supposed to be responding, and finally, this Assembly and its members, both past and present. These institutions of tradition in our society did not appear overnight. No, they arose, as the common law has, from time immemorial. Generations of statesmen have risen and fallen, washing over these institutions, refining them, defining them, dignifying them, just as waves wash over harsh rocks, making them into jewels. And Mr. Speaker, that is our heritage here. It is a jewel that has been preserved and polished for us. Tradition has lent this 30th legislature her strong arm and has pulled us up to great heights. In our present age, which values progress above all else, the role of tradition can be easily forgotten. But we must remember, Mr. Speaker, as Chesterton wrote, quote, "Tradition is the democracy of the dead." It means giving a vote to the most obscure of all classes, our ancestors. Tradition refuses to submit to the small and arrogant oligarchy of those who are merely to be happy to be walking about today. All Democrats object to men being disqualified by the accident of their birth. So true, tradition objects to their being disqualified by the accident of their death. Democracy tells us not to neglect a good man's opinion, even if he is our groom. And tradition asks us not to neglect a good man's opinion, even if he is our father." Unquote. Our legislature and cabinet are institutional manifestations of this tradition by making present the will of the people, the rule of law for all Albertans, and the Crown, our sovereign authority to govern in this chamber. This legislature is the continuity of the political patrimony of all of our Western civilization. We members are the stewards of that. And nearly a millennium of tradition and history that allows me to speak freely in this chamber on behalf of my constituents today. The seed that was planted nearly 1,000 years ago at Runnymede in 1215, when King John signed the Magna Carta, has blossomed into a tree, and that tree has borne good fruit for us. But trees must be tended, and our institutions must be guarded, both within and without. Tradition is a living being. Like all living beings, it must be pruned and cultivated. Culture is the means whereby we cultivate our traditions and guard our institutions. These traditions, however, are not playthings to be manipulated or corpses to mutilate. When cultivating and pruning our traditions, we must always keep the word of William Wordsworth in our mind when he said, "We must not murder to dissect." The tree, once felled, lies dead, and no fruit will be born from her boughs. So it is true with our traditions. Any attempt at a clean break from tradition is akin to a hewing off of our own legs. And as soon as you cut them off, Mr. Speaker, we are not going anywhere anytime soon. Therefore, we owe all our predecessors gratitude and our ancestors, and I thank them now for all the service that they have done for future generations, our current generation. Third, Mr. Speaker, I thank my family. Every one of us in this House has a family for whom we owe thanks. The family is the first and fundamental of all institutions that populates our society. It is in the family that our children first learn to speak, to know right from wrong, selfless service to siblings, and it is in the family that our children are taught the fundamental truths and most deeply held convictions that we hold. John Paul II believes that, quote, "The history of mankind, the history of salvation, passes by way of the family." It is true not only in the theological context quoted, but also in a very earthy and practical sense. We are formed and informed by the love and support of our families. All of us pass by way of a family, and I am no different. So, Mr. Speaker, allow me to share with the House just one short story from my own family history, recorded in a humble rural newspaper. My grandfather and great-uncle were immigrants from Poland to what, at the turn of the 20th century, was the edge of the wild, a quarter section in the north, just north of Barrhead. Here I'll quote from the Barrhead leader. After Uncle Frank and my father bought 160 acres of homestead north of Barrhead, paying $10 an acre, and then the government opened up more land for homesteading, Make bought an additional land in Vega, this time for $12 an acre. My Uncle Frank said, quote, "The land was nothing but bush, and it all had to be cleared by hand." I'm told he later had a tractor to help him. He continued on, finishing the article by saying, "Time flies. I remember on the boat from Poland like it was yesterday, and here's 100 years creeping on me. I've had a good life and 92 years of happiness. What more could one ask for?" Uncle Frank finished his life with gratitude, as did my father, my grandfather, and all of my ancestors before me. I'm grateful to them today. And I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to indulge the House. And I offer thanks to my mother, my father, my 3 brothers, my dear wife in the legislature, and every family member that came before us. The weight of our generation now carried on our shoulders is made light, and the water we carry is made easy when we pick up the yoke of our ancestors and draw from their wells. Fourth, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank my God, the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. For how can I not thank my God? He has given me all, my constituency, my country, and my family. These are all gifts, and I would be greatly amiss if I were to be grateful for the gifts but not to the gifter. I would be such a fool if I were to be thankful for the creation but not the creator. For many current political commentators, the role of religion and faith in society is often misunderstood and for them relegated to history books. I propose, however, that religion is a contemporary act in our society, as unfamiliar a manifestation it may be to those authors of those history books. Religion is often conflated with culture or deeply held personal opinions. While religion certainly shapes culture and personal beliefs, it indefinitely transcends them. But most importantly for my speech today, it is said that religion fully reveals man to himself. Religion fully reveals man to himself. I believe humanity can be best understood in its mission and purpose through the exercise of religion. Therefore, free expression of religion via public faith is necessary for full and true participation in any free society. In ancient antiquity, civil and religious powers were one. Happily, that is no longer the case, a lesson in history from Ambrose and Thomas Becket and Thomas More for another speech. But the separation of church and state is one of the jewels of our Western civilization. However, this separation is often misunderstood, and the separation from church from state does not mean that religion is relegated exclusively to private life. From a religious perspective, such a position is untenable. How can a citizen believe that God is the ultimate meaning to existence, believe that God reveals man to himself, but be expected to leave his religion at home when stepping into the public square? The separation of church and state means that religion and government both have legitimate spheres in which they operate. They are both free, not one greater than the other, no one able to dominate the other. In other words, the separation of church and state means that religion and government are respectable peers, neither bedfellows nor strangers, neither master nor servant. And why do I say all of this? I say this to make a simple point, that human dignity is contingent on the free exercise of religion. If we truly wish for a humane society where humanity can truly flourish, we cannot cut off the river from the spring any more than we can separate humanity from God. The great link that ensures humanity is not cut off from its source is liberty. Through liberty, then, humanity's divine calling can come to fulfillment. In my belief, as such, conscience and freedom of religion is paramount for a free society. To strip a man of his public faith is to strip a man of his own self. I suggest that to want a naked public square with our religion checked at the cloakroom is just as desirable as a public square devoid of moral obligation or any earnest conviction. We are a province built in part by public faith and its expression. Many of our great prairie heroes, from Lacombe to Manning, from Douglas to Blakey, have been motivated by religion and their great works informed by faith. In closing, Mr. Speaker and honourable colleagues, these 4 thank yous stand as something of a roadmap for my hopes as a politician. I hope to serve my constituents as they deserve, and although legislating can be tiring, as Sir Alexander Mackenzie found, I will be tireless in promoting the common good. Second, I hope to uphold the dignity and grace of this chamber we inhabit, always trusting in the traditions of our province and our country are not things to be scorned, but treasures and jewels to be cherished. I hope to promote the good of all families, Mr. Speaker, always acknowledging that the state, though properly ordered for a good society, it is a poor nanny and should never replace and substitute the family. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I hope, as the highest law of the land, our charter states, acknowledging the supremacy of God, upholding the dignity of conscience, and fighting for the freedom of religion. These 4 points, these 4 hopes and thank yous, my constituency, my country, my family, my God, are the things for which I am most grateful today. And these are the things which I dedicate my life to in public service. So help me God.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I believe under Standing Order 2928, I see the Honourable Member for Cardston-Siksika.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Peace River for his wonderful remarks in response to the throne speech. I have known the member from Peace River for a long time. He's been a dear friend. He's a tremendous campaigner. I'm certain a wonderful husband, son, and even a pain. But I can tell you that in this chamber, you'll be hard to find a man of greater character. And so I know he has worked diligently to get here, as we all have. And I'd like to know if he could maybe comment a little bit further about his road getting here, where it started, what really motivated him to be part of this great change that we are involved in, the movement, as we call it, and maybe what he hopes to accomplish in this chamber and in his tenure as a member of the Legislative Assembly. So if I can ask the member of Peace River to maybe respond to that.
The Honourable Member from Peace River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And through to you, I'd like to thank my honourable friend and colleague, the member from Cardston-Siksika, for his comments and questions. We have had a long friendship, the member and myself, and it's been fruitful, and I'm grateful for it. But it is not just that member alone. Many of the members on this side of the House have become dear friends of mine. And the story of how I made my decision to enter into politics to strive for the common good in public service would be lacking without acknowledging every one of them along the way, particularly the Premier of Alberta, who has become a dear friend of mine and a mentor in many ways, along with many other members of the front bench today. Men and women that I look up to and I'm grateful for in their friendship. The decision itself is difficult. I'm very grateful that my wife is here today in the gallery to watch, and it's been a longer road for her than me, perhaps. I believe anyone who wants to thank me for any service must go through and thank her first. The decision was not taken lightly, but I believe she also is grateful that we have this opportunity together, husband and wife as a family, to continue to advocate for what we believe is the truth and speak on behalf of the constituents in the beautiful constituency at Peace River. I'll leave my comments there and thank Mr. Speaker and all my honourable colleagues for putting up with me and my speech for the last 15 minutes.